Hi and welcome to the Homeopathy Health Show. I'm Atiq Ahmed Bhatti, a fourth generation homeopath with over 25 years of professional experience and practice in this field of healing. The Homeopathy Health Show is the online voice of homeopathy around the world, promoting and raising awareness of this truly unique system of healing, which is suitable for all ages, young and old. Every week I invite guests from the world of homeopathy to come and share their experiences, their work, offer insights, and essentially talk all things homeopathy. Why not visit www.liketreatslike.co.uk and click on the radio and podcast button to listen to the latest episodes. So let's begin today's show here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. Hi and welcome to another episode of the Homeopathy Health Show, and of course, and as always, I do hope you're well and that you've had a pleasant week. Now, in today's episode, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Gabrielle Traub from San Diego in the United States. Now, Gabrielle is a board-certified classical homeopath and is an international best-selling author and completed her 5-year homeopathic medical degree program in South Africa, where she trained in hospitals and rural clinics. She dedicated a year to research, conducting double-blind clinical trials on anxiety and difficulty related to concentration and ADD and ADHD. Now, after moving to California, she worked in an OB/GYN practice for a decade alongside a traditional OB/GYN and a fertility endocrinologist. She was previously part of a core team of clinicians at an inpatient treatment center specializing in eating disorders, addictions, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, and chronic pain. Now, amazingly enough, Gabrielle, apart from all of this, has also taught homeopathy in England, woohoo, because that's where I am, South Africa, Pakistan, Dubai, Israel, Australia, and throughout the United States. And she is the founder of the World Homeopathy Awareness Week. And for those of you who are following my socials, you know we did a considerable amount during that week to promote homeopathy. So did all the other homeopaths around the world. It was absolutely fabulous. And I must thank Gabrielle for that. Now, Gabrielle received an honorary doctorate for her contribution towards homeopathic research and is the author of Live Right for Your Remedy Type. And we're going to be talking about this book later on. But for now, let's move to my guest for today, Gabrielle Traub. Thank you so very much for joining me. Woohoo!
Atiq, this is such an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show, and I love the conversation.
Absolute pleasure. So let's dive in. It's interesting. I've just found out, obviously, as we were talking, that you were born in South Africa. But do tell me about studying the 5-year course. And also, what makes the course different? Because generally around the world, the courses are between 3 to 4 years as far as homeopathy is concerned.
Yeah, so in South Africa, we go to, in my year anyway, we trained at the medical school. So we did anatomy, physiology, dissecting cadavers. Basically, we trained as primary care physicians. We doctors. We even learned suturing and, injections. And we spent a week riding around in an ambulance, learning emergency medicine. The thing about South Africa is they really have a shortage of doctors. So when the homeopathic program came into effect and they saw that we could be helpful doing pap smears or just, in rural areas where there's no doctors or hospitals for miles around and somebody needs suturing, it was wonderful for them to be able to utilize us as homeopaths and train us to be able to fulfill that gap. And so we are trained, it's very similar to India. We trained as a medical doctor. We are, for all purposes, a doctor, and we get very rigorous training in the medical arts as well as in homeopathy. one of the very beautiful things about my training, which was so valuable and so wonderful, is we had a lot of hospital experience. And so we would do rotations just like the medical students. We were in a outpatient hospital. Actually in Hillbrow, we did some rotations. So we went to dermatology, gynecology, all the different rotations. And we were just thrown in, head first in the deep end,
Mm,
having to know our medical skills. And what was there was one day actually was really, really interesting. There was a patient from Malawi and she spoke Chichewa and she had never been to a doctor before. And so she come from a very rural area and she didn't speak any English and she was terrified. And the chief medical officer there, she actually ended up having acute appendicitis and needed an emergency appendectomy. And I'd just been to Malawi and I spoke a little bit of Chichewa enough to kind of calm her down and make her feel calm. And the chief medical officer was so impressed that this like white female homeopathic student could speak Chichewa. He like, told me more about our program. And we actually had a homeopathic clinic. That was quite slow at the time, but as soon as they found out about us and that we had air conditioning and no wait times, because people would literally line up at the beginning of the day, winding down the street, down like blocks, and not being able to be seen because they just didn't have enough medical staff. Eventually, they started referring so many patients to our clinic. And so we got to see all these like weird and wonderful, we saw everything. There was nothing we didn't see. We saw syphilis, we saw gangrene. I mean, and as homeopaths to be able to help those people with homeopathy and see how amazing homeopathy can be for these like very severe pathological conditions. When you talk about, oh, homeopathy is just placebo, it just helps you feel better mentally, emotionally. When you see gangrene treated with homeopathy and
mm.
it gets better, I mean, it gives you the confidence that, wow, this stuff is amazing, it really works. And it just gives you the feeling like, it really can treat almost anything. There are very few things besides emergency medicine, of course, and sometimes patients need surgery. Just the scope of what's possible with homeopathy is just, it blows my mind. And it was just such a cool and amazing, I feel so blessed to be able to help those people and have those experiences. The
Yeah.
other thing that was I tell my students a lot is so when you're treating patients in South Africa, sometimes they don't have an address, they don't have a telephone number, you don't know if you're ever going to see them again. You can't just like work on their case for 3 days and call them up on the phone and tell them to go out and get a remedy. So we were trained to prescribe on the spot. We had to think on the spot, repertoire, get really confident in what we were treating, and so I've always done it that way. And I think there's something really powerful and wonderful to be able to send them right there. We had a full dispensary. We had actually at our clinic, we had radiology. We could do all the labs, whatever they needed right there. And they would actually wait. They would just, in South Africa, the mentality is you wait maybe a few hours to get your remedy. Maybe you need labs, whatever you need, but you get sent home with your remedy right then and there. And I think there's something really powerful about that you can just kind of start this treatment while they in that current state. They're not waiting weeks or days on end.
I absolutely love that, and I resonate fully with that. I did a lot of research and training with my uncle in East Africa, and he was a very well-known homeopath there. And this is exactly what would happen. We're talking rural clinics and rural parts of the world as such, and people would just knock on the door day and night. No appointment system. They'd just come, they'd knock on the door, we need help. And you had to think on your feet. And even though you're at the deep end, first few times you think, oh my God, is this all these questions? Did I do it right? Did I make a mistake? What will happen? But it's so good because, I mean, personally, intuition comes in as well. Remedies are certainly reinforced, and the quick thinking actually keeps you on your toes, to be perfectly honest. And you see the results and you think, wow, this is phenomenal. I same with you, I'm quite sure here, but patients would come in, they'd knock, they'd be brought in, they'd sit down, they'd, here are my symptoms, blah, 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 this is what happened. And you'd give them a remedy and they'd wait in a waiting room, which was actually the lounge for as far as my uncle's house is concerned, right? they'd wait there, and then he'd tend to the next patient. And then after about 20 minutes, he'd come back. How are you? Feeling better. And
That's
it's just
amazing.
amazing.
That's amazing. And as you know, like even, I love my computer and my computerized repertory and doing everything super
Mhm.
fast. But as you know, there are times where there's power failures and you don't have your repertory, or maybe you don't have everything that we're so used to having as our, and you just make it work. You use your book repertories, and it's
Yeah,
amazing, just how you adapt to any kind of situation.
it's
Um,
amazing, isn't it? It really is.
mhm.
And I think you've had the best training, to be honest, because to be there in the deep end, and the fact that also not just that, but also the fact that homeopathy actually comes to life in rural clinics, because the results
Yeah.
are, and I don't mean this for every single case that the results are instant, but what I mean is they're so profound, aren't they? You can see it happening, right? And it's very different to the West, where it's very organized appointment system, consultation, case history, blah blah blah. Whereas there, people are coming, like you said, someone's been bitten by a snake, God forbid, someone's got a migraine, someone's got digestive disturbance, whatever it may be. But you've got to think on your feet. You have literally have to, is it carbo veg? Is it China? Is it Califos? Whatever it is. And the results are brilliant. And I love homeopathy in rural areas. I absolutely, the stories that people share are just
I
amazing.
have to share a story. So, I did one of my internships with just an amazing homeopath, and he's no longer, unfortunately, but he would have sometimes his farm overall on, and tending to his farm animals, and then he'd put over his white coat and his stethoscope. And one day I was there, and his wife said to me, okay, we have our first patient for the day. Nellie's outside. And Nellie ended up being an ostrich. we had to we treated
Brilliant.
Nellie, and Nellie's obviously nonverbal, so we have to use all of our powers of observation from a
Brilliant.
homeopathic perspective, really using all of our senses. I remember I worked in a gangrene clinic with a doctor, Dr. Jekylls, and to know if the gangrene is getting better, he shoves your nose in. You have to smell if the gangrene, like it's very hands-on, it's very real and raw. The other thing about South Africa, and I'm a huge fan of therapy, so please don't get me wrong, but people there don't often have the resources to go for years of counseling. So you don't have all of this kind of cognitive kind of distancing. They don't have like this cognitive, everything's raw. Everything's just pure and raw. And in some ways, it makes it a little easier to treat in some ways. Although certainly when you're working with like a Staphysagria and they have all this emotion coming out, or Natmer, then the therapy can be a really great adjunctive tool to help them process that. But it's cool. It's just really real barefoot medicine. Um,
Absolutely. And it's so malleable and adaptable, isn't it? It's so
mhm.
there, it's so in the moment. It goes literally with the flow of the patient. You mentioned
Mm.
Staphysagria, Natmio, Ignatia, and maybe Platinum Met. And, some of these remedies, I mean, I say this specifically for especially emotional disorders, which we're going to be talking about soon. They're so profound, they're so powerful. And the changes are lasting changes. We're not talking about temporary palliation. This is serious stuff. It can get people out of the rut. They pull their socks up and they're able to move. And it's just a gentle push, isn't it? Off you
Yeah,
go. Here's the remedy.
yeah. Amazing. I feel like if you are not quite sure about how you feel about homeopathy, you need to spend some time in those rural clinics, and then at the end of it, there'll be no doubt in your mind. It's just so clear.
Yeah. There's a joke which is not homeopathy, but you know what driving is like in India. I'm sure you've seen it, right? Or Pakistan. You've trained, you know what it's like. So
Yeah.
I always say, in this country we get tickets or fines for speeding and so forth. I said the punishment shouldn't be like a community service or prison sentence. Send them to India or Pakistan and get them to drive there, because they'll never make a mistake again.
That's brilliant. I love
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
isn't it?
And that's the thing, is in medicine as well. You won't, if put into that setting, you'll get so good at your prescribing,
Yeah,
honestly.
absolutely.
Mm. The
Now,
other thing is just the mental kind of attitude is people don't differentiate you it's from a doctor, which I think there should be a distinction. We are different. We practice very, very different types of medicine, but the respect, homeopaths are so much more highly esteemed. I remember um, in South Africa, telling somebody when I first started out that I'm a homeopath, and the response was, wow, that's such a noble profession. And that's actually why I started World Homeopathy Awareness Week, is I came to America and I was like shocked that people didn't like view it as like a real profession. It was like shock because my whole life homeopathy was like a noble profession. It was like a powerful medicine. And so coming here, and people didn't even know the difference between homeopathy and aromatherapy. I was like, hold on a minute, there's something wrong. We need to change this. And that's how I started the whole thing.
I have to say, as I said, honestly, Homeopathy Awareness Week is genius. It really gets everybody working together. So thank you for something like that, you
Well,
know?
if it wasn't for people like you doing it, it wouldn't be around. So thank you. Thank you for keeping it going.
This year was especially important because of introducing Homeopathy, the film, which you are a part of
Yeah.
as well. So you are a celebrity and you must send me your autograph, okay?
Oh, yeah. Only if you send me yours back. I'm hardly a celebrity compared to you, Atik.
It was a very such a fantastic time, wasn't it, around April, because of just that,
Wow.
and so many things came together, and even now I know that there's a lot going on in the background that people may not be aware of. But I said to Kim Aaliyah, and that they adopted this actually. I said 2024 is the year of homeopathy. And they mentioned this in some of their posts, and it's so true because it is. There's so much, Gabrielle, going on this year. I'm sure you know, around the world, and it's like homeopathy is really booming, isn't it?
It's
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 right at the top.
exploding. And the film is just brilliant. Oh my gosh. They did the producers and Kim and his whole incredible team did such a fantastic, phenomenal job. It's just incredible.
And you're amazing in it, by the way.
Thank you.
So thank you for being there as well. Actually, I think it's so important. Now, moving on, of course, your experience is tremendous and you are very, very rounded, especially in mental and emotional conditions. Sadly, nowadays, we see that there is a plethora of health conditions which are related to the mind and the emotions. And, my question to you was, and I've asked this to other homeopaths as well, with PTSD, which you've mentioned in your bio and the work that you've done with ADD and anxiety and so forth. Is this actually something new, or has it always been there, but we're at a stage now where people can talk about it, just like men can openly cry. They can do that
Hmm.
and they feel comfortable
Hmm.
doing that. You don't have to hide behind something. Or is it the society and the world that we live in? I'm talking to you. I'm surrounded by radiation because I've got three screens. I've got a mic, I've got my iPhone on the left and headphones on. And, is it all that? Is there all that interference with our body, with chemicals and through electronics and so forth, which is giving us this situation, or is it social?
So that's such a great question. I love the question. I'm so grateful that you asked. So thank you for that. There definitely is an awareness, but that is not what's going on. There is more acceptance and more, less of a stigma. But that is not what's going on. There definitely is an increase without a doubt. I mean, I just remember when I was in school, there was maybe one kid with autism in the whole school or a little bit of ADHD. I mean, I remember the rates of, yes, there is more increased diagnosis, but that's not what's going on, even with Alzheimer's. And I think it's not one factor. I think it's a combination. So this like kind of perfect storm, this collective soup of multiple factors. I definitely think that, I am personally believe that we are affected by EMFs, by chemicals in our food. Our food is a huge huge factor. I
Mm.
mean, it's a huge factor. I just learned the other day that there are certain foods that China actually imports to the US, but is banned in China. They don't allow them to sell it to China, but we eat it here in the US. The US food is terrible. Um, and just the amount of glyphosates in our environment, the chemicals, it's a toxic burden that is harder and harder as it increases for our bodies to deal with, especially people with problems with methylation and problems with the detoxification pathways. Some people can tolerate it much better, but I feel like we are all affected, even if people have obvious symptoms or not. The rates of cancer are in the increase. Diabetes is on the increase, certainly from the food we eat. And I think But I think there are other factors too. For example, during the pandemic lockdowns, that definitely increased suicidal rates,
Mm.
addiction. We weren't able to go out and exercise, breathe in the fresh air. All that contributes. Um, but unless we make a change to the chemicals in our environment, I don't see things improving. Certainly, we can improve a lot with homeopathy. We can improve how people's bodies are able to become more resilient, how we're able to detoxify better. But if you have to be able to get rid of the chemicals at a higher rate than that you expose to them. Otherwise, it's accumulative. And yeah, I don't think it's just one thing. I don't think it's just the food or just the water or just the air. It's that perfect storm of everything together. And these days, the amount of chronic disease in children, it's
Yeah.
astounding. I have an 11-year-old, and it's as a parent, this is something that's very personal and very real. And I see my kids' friends all on medications. It's shocking. You see schools at lunch hour, the nurses handing out all their medications. It's so sad. It breaks my heart, honestly.
You mentioned China. I read a report recently that Japan actually have banned all those foods which they know to be toxic to humans. And that's so brilliant. I mean, it really is. I mean, that's forward thinking. It's fine, you could say, to have a certain food type, but when you know it's toxic or maybe it's got too many chemicals in it, it's better to avoid it, right?
The solution, honestly, without trying to get political, we have to get lobbying out of our government. We have to get that out of our government. We have to have no invested interests, and we have to have scientists that are impartial and not have any hidden agenda. That's the only way to change it in our country or in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying not to comment on it because,
Yeah.
as you said, we don't want to get political, but yeah, eventually there has to be justice. I
Hmm.
always think of homeopathy as a service to humanity. And Gabrielle, very well what we give. I'm up till 2 a.m. some days. I'm sure you have had that experience many times or continue to. So do many other homeopaths, thinking of a patient's case, worrying about one individual. I hope this works, or I hope that I've got the repertorization, but the remedies and putting everything together. Imagine if that was replicated. So when you hold an office of respect, you actually do serve humanity with justice and equality. I mean,
Mhm.
wow, wow, wow.
It's so interesting. I have patients say to me, I wish that their doctors, their husbands, their wives, their teachers would be open to homeopathy. And that's kind of the role that I see with the Introducing Homeopathy movie. It's so powerful and so profound that anybody watching the movie has to, with a reasonable critical thinking, has to start asking questions. Well, maybe what if there was something here? What if this is valuable of exploration? Maybe, create a kind of a curiosity around homeopathy without just sweeping it aside. And I think it's really important that our doctors, that our, people in power do watch this movie. And so that's one of the roles that I see the movie as having.
I wanted to go back to mental health conditions and emotions. I know that you did a number of double-blind trials in South Africa. Can you just elaborate on that and what was involved in that process and what your findings were?
Yeah, so part of our training is that every student conducts double-blind clinical trials, and we get a lot of support. I honestly, I didn't realize how lucky we were. So, as part of our course, we study probability and statistics. We have a statistician that we meet with once a week. We had a librarian that would just collect abstracts every week for us, put it in our folder. So we had a lot of support. It's research is so hard, and it's not something that one person can do alone. You need a lot of support, and we had a whole institution supporting us. We had grants, we had funding. Um, but at the same time, I was very fresh behind the ears. And, you just graduate from homeopathy school. And I think the research that I did was sound, and I got statistically significant results, which was very nice to have more studies like that in homeopathy. But what happened is I used three homeopathic remedies during the study. And then after the study, the subjects had enough results to kind of want to continue. Um,
Mm.
and, and as it turned out, when I finally ended up being able to treat them individually, it's actually interesting. Very few of them actually ended up needing the remedies in the study. It was completely individualized to them, and we were able to eventually get much more deeper, profound results, obviously treating them constitutionally. So, in retrospect, it was a sound study, but I would have definitely done it differently had I had more experience and known more. I think that's always the case. Um, but I used Caliphos for kind of brain fag, difficulty thinking, concentrating. The study was actually on thought interference, which is difficulty concentrating, nervousness and anxiety. So kind of that anticipatory anxiety. And so I also used gelsemium and argentum nitricum. Those were the three remedies that were used in the study. It was a relatively short study period. We were on campus, so it was so easy actually to get subjects. We just put out posters around the campus. Anybody having difficulty with test anxiety, difficulty concentrating, wanting to do better at their grades, we got a ton of students, which is really good. We had a nice, large pool of subjects. But to be honest, it felt very superficial, the depth that we were going.
Mm.
And I ended up prescribing so many different remedies when I could actually treat them individually and go deeper. And honestly, some of the students, the problem that they had was just not enough food. They were starving. They didn't have access to food or a quiet study space, or, we take these things for granted. But it's some of them just needed, other things in conjunction with homeopathy to help them.
You mentioned something very interesting, and I know that we spoke about this just offline as well, which was to do with thought interference. And I do a lot of work with, of course, homeopathy is mind, body, and soul, mind, body, and spirit, however one defines it. But certainly the psyche is an absolutely huge part in this. And, it also makes me wonder because there's so many of these videos out, even from the 40s and 50s, about manifesting because it works on the psyche. That's not the road I'm going down, but I'm saying that with the psyche in mind and this thought interference, it's so important, isn't it? Because it's just like saying we are what we eat, yes, but we are also what we think.
Mhm.
I've always found that people who have this magnetism, such as yourself, of course, um,
Thank
they
you.
have this massive positive mental attitude, and this whole drive that's the psyche is saying, everything is great, everything is going to be fine. It's just a blip, let's carry on. It's the train remains on the track. It doesn't have to stop at a station. It can carry on, you know. And it's so important, isn't it, nowadays? Because we're pulled and pushed and trampled on, dare I say it, and then, lifted up and then pushed and pulled again. And everybody's life is like that, right? People from somebody who's weighing three jobs to somebody who's just a single mom, to somebody who's just lost their job, to somebody who's just, where you could argue life has perhaps thrown so many challenges at them and they feel defeated. But you've got within that winners, right? But the point of all of this is that this is where homeopathy is so absolutely incredible, isn't it? Where it can help so many individuals, so many emotional conditions at so many levels, right?
So I love that you brought that up. That's so profound and so true, Atik. Some people are just naturally more optimistic. That's just their personality. Not everybody is, but that is definitely part of their state and part of their dis-ease. And very often, I'm sure you've experienced this as well. The first thing that a patient feels when they take a well-indicated homeopathic remedy is just that lift in their vital force that creates that level of optimism. Sometimes the actual physical symptoms don't go away right away, but they just their attitude towards them feels different. They're like, you know what? I still have that pain in my left foot, but for some reason it doesn't bother me as much anymore. And I know that it will get better. I'm not feeling that same level of like despair or hopelessness or kind of stuck. And that's the first thing we see. It's beautiful when we look at the evolution of healing and the stages of healing is that lift, that initial feeling of positivity and optimism that you can say to someone, you need to feel more optimistic. You need to have a positive outlet. In reality, that's very hard to do because that's part of the disease. That's part of the state. So even with coming to, part of my book, Live Right for Your Remedy type about lifestyle and diet and exercise, you can tell people to exercise or eat healthy. Sometimes they know all the things, but it's really hard to do. But if you can give a remedy that kind of just gives that initial lift, that suddenly, I had a patient the other day who, came to me. She had thyroid problems and difficulty losing weight. And then after the remedy, she said, I've just started exercising every day and eating healthy. And that's great. I didn't want to take any weight thing away from her, but she'd been told plenty of times what to do. It's only after taking the remedy that she was able to implement those changes in her diet and lifestyle. So sometimes we can tell people through the roof to think positively, but when you take a remedy, it just happens organically. There's a shift that happens that's so kind of subtle but profound at the same time. And I know you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I give you an example, but this doesn't mean it, for homeopaths listening that that's the remedy, but I have to illustrate it. But just personally, I found with the batch flower remedy, walnut, and I prescribed it many years ago for somebody who knew what they wanted to do, but they were just stuck and they wouldn't go through that door, that virtual imaginary door. And walnut just gave them a push. And I thought, this is interesting. So I did it again. I repeated it several times. And now anybody who comes where they're absolutely stuck and they just need that gentle push, as you were saying, I just give them a dose of walnut. And it totally exactly what you said. It's like, oh, by the way, I'm doing this now. And I managed to go for that interview and I managed to do this at home. And you think, wow, that's
I
the cure,
love
right?
that. I
That's the cure.
love that. That's beautiful. That's what healing's all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Gabrielle, how do you sort of work on those with mental health and emotional conditions? We're talking, you've mentioned PTSD, thought interference, ADD, ADHD is huge, isn't it, nowadays? Um, what is, for those listening, really, what's the homeopathic approach, I suppose?
Yeah, so I've been very blessed with very unique and beautiful opportunities in my work life. So I was actually part of a core treatment team of doctors. So homeopathy was fundamental treatment. Everybody got it in an inpatient setting. So this was a clinic for inpatients, so they residential treatment for eating disorders, addictions, chronic pain, and PTSD. And every person who came there got homeopathic treatment. I was able to, we had treatment meetings with all the providers. So the psychiatrist, the nutritionist, the homeopathy, we kind of all worked together, argued our case. It was actually a very good experience for me because there was initially a little bit of hostility from some of the providers. And so I had to argue my case, and the doctors would see the transformation. They would see, so the nurses would actually administer the homeopathic remedy to the patient directly. In fact, I had initially said, don't give it around food or water or other medication. And so one of my patients said that the nurses were waking them up at 3 o'clock in the morning so they could be given the remedy away from the med. And I said, no, stop doing that. Just give it when you can. Um, but I treated each patient individually. You do the same thing. You would take a case. I did see the patients more frequently, so I would actually go there once every 2 weeks and see all the patients, to spend like a whole long day back to back seeing patients. So there was a kind of a more rapid change, and that actually worked really well with that population, especially because they were getting other adjunctive therapies as well. That way I could make slight little tweaks. And also, it was more severe mental pathology. For example, we had a one patient, she weighed like 76 pounds. She was actually going into kidney failure and cardiac problems from her eating disorder. But you treat it the same way. You just take the case, you listen to the patient, you use all your observations of homeopathy, and we have beautiful remedies. We have the most beautiful, elegant homeopathic remedies for psychiatric conditions, and they work really well. And it's sometimes, people think that homeopathy is only for minor things, but actually, the more severe the presentation, the more severe, more, the presentation, the easier it is to find the homeopathic remedy because it's just
Mm.
more obvious, it's more out there. And so we can use some of our amazing remedies to help with that. Um, what other things can I say about it? It was just very powerful. I think, there's certain areas where homeopathy really thrives. And I would say the areas that I observe it is in mental health, in obstetrics and gynecology, women's health conditions, and in treating children. Those are the areas where I've experienced like these dramatic changes in homeopathy very quickly. Um, and they would come there for a period. So I only had where there was like 3 months to work with them. So this was like short-term treatment. Part of the contract was they weren't actually allowed to contact us afterwards because the owners were worried that they would leave the program early and just contact us
Mm.
directly. So we had like whether it be 6 weeks or 3 months, this is the short time that we had, and we had to get results, quickly. So it was just really fun and exciting to be able to help those patients.
You know that I've said this on the show many times. Now is, well, I said it earlier, actually, 2024, the year of homeopathy. But truly, as far as mental health and emotional imbalances are concerned, this is absolutely the time more than ever before for homeopathy because it shines. So anyone listening who perhaps is just listening just because they're interested in homeopathy, honestly speaking, if you know anyone who has mental health conditions, who has an emotional disturbance, go and see a homeopath. At least just talk about it and what homeopathy can offer. Because 200 or 220 or whatever years ago, somebody founded this system of medicine, which is now the second largest system on the planet. And he founded it on the mental conditions of the patient, followed by the physicals. And now, today, we find ourselves right at that junction, don't we? Where everybody is coming with the mental conditions, followed by
And
the physicals, right?
yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And what I love, if you read the Organon, Hahnemann he talked about the dangers of opiates and how that can cause addiction. I mean, he talked about so many like profound things that are just kind of in our awareness in the last decade. He talked about the dangers of living in basements and moldy cellars and all the
Mm.
rest. One of the patients that I worked with in the inpatient treatment center, he had a comorbidity diagnosis for both addictions and PTSD. And Staph aureus was the remedy that I gave him. And at the time, all this rage came out of him. And actually, at the facility, they didn't really know what to do with him because it was just kind of out of control. In fact, they ended up building like a padded room just after I
Mm.
gave him the homeopathic remedy. But once all the rage and once he was given permission for all this anger to come out, he had this level of calm and peace for the first time in his life. And it was just, wow, I've never knew that this was in me. And it was so beautiful to be able to be part of that.
I always call Staph aureus the Hulk remedy. Yeah, you got to let the Hulk out.
You got to let the Hulk out. You
You
just got
know,
to let it
you
out.
you can be Bruce Banner, but not yet. Let it out, and then you can go back to Bruce Banner.
I
You
love
know?
your analogies. They're so fantastic. Yeah. Uh,
Now we must go on to your book, and I'm sorry for those who cannot see the video because I know it's an audio podcast, but I'm holding up Gabrielle's book, even though she's the one who wrote it, okay? But this is how it goes. So there's your book. Thank you so very much for sending me a copy.
oh, I
Um,
hope you enjoy it.
this book is called Live Right for Your Remedy Type. And you're an author, of course, a very successful author indeed. One of your other books is Fertility, Secrets, Struggles, and Successes. But Live Right for Your Remedy Type is your latest book. And it's actually the Homeopathy Lifestyle Guide, which I absolutely love. I love that wording, Homeopathy Lifestyle Guide. So do tell us about the book and what actually made you want to write it in the first place.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So, in addition to homeopathy, I'm a huge advocate of healthy eating, movement, meditation, stress management, all the rest. And I had a patient come to see me and she said, "Oh, I can just go out and, abuse my body because I know I can just come and see you can fix me." And I hated that. I find a lot of homeopaths are not that healthy themselves. They're so mentally focused that they kind of lose track of taking care of their body. And then I do have a lot of patients that would like to be involved and have more of a partnership relationship with me where they feel like they can be empowered to make changes in their life, but they don't know what's going to be best for them. And we live in a world where diet recommendations are constantly changing. People are told to go keto or vegan or, carnivore. And it's very overwhelming for patients to know which is the right exercise for them, which is the best diet for them. And the truth is, it depends. And it's not depending on what the latest fad is at the time. It depends on the individual. And so I've also studied Ayurveda. I taught at traditional Chinese medicine school. So I'm very familiar with kind of other modalities that look at incorporating diet and lifestyle. And I wanted to be able to give a patient a very personalized lifestyle guide. And I found that looking at all the data from our Matera Medicas, from hundreds of years of homeopaths making observations, we know that there's certain things that are good for some and good for others. And we could actually base that on their current constitutional type. And when I mean current, their state may change. And when their state changes, they actually need different things. So for example, our pulsatilla patients we know tend to be thirstless. They don't drink enough water, and this can set them up for UTIs. They also tend to not be able to tolerate fats because they often have a weakness in their gallbladder and can't emulsify the fats properly. But if you're not emulsifying the fats properly, then you're not producing the hormones that you need to be as healthy as possible and balance your. So it's all integrated. So for a pulsatilla type, in addition to giving them homeopathic pulsatilla, we have to remind them to drink more water. And how often do we actually do that? How often do we say, well, in addition to taking this remedy, these are the things that can actually maximize your health? And patients love that. And so I wrote a guide for my own patients. And after sharing this with colleagues, and them telling me, wow, this has really helped my patients. Very simple and it's easy to do. And, you give them this guide and they can make so much broader changes that are more fundamental in their health and well-being. And so that's how we developed the book. I was able to, it took a lot of work for me to put this all together. I literally worked on this book for years and years and years. And I put together the lifestyle for 21 remedies. Obviously, that's not complete. We have more than 21 remedies. So I have a Facebook group that I was hoping to kind of get input from other homeopaths so we could do this work together. I was hoping that this would just be the beginning of a conversation about talking about lifestyle recommendations for other remedy types and expanding it to as many remedy types as possible. But we do need different things depending on the state that we're in. If you put a pulsatilla type on a ketogenic diet, they're going to be a mess. You don't want to do that. It's just a nightmare. And so we have to consider the individual when we're making these lifestyle choices and recommendations. Many times I find that providers tend to make the recommendations for diet and lifestyle that works for them personally. personally without considering the individual. And so we have all this information, and I just packaged it in a way that's easy for them to understand and implement.
You know that what you just said is so important, where sometimes advice can be given where one himself or herself has used and they find it favorable, but it doesn't work that way. Like you've so eloquently said, it doesn't work that way. Every individual from a homeopathic perspective is individual, right? It's totally different from the next. So it just makes comments. It's just logical, isn't it, that you would give them the advice that's appropriate to them, because two pulsatilla types, one may actually be drinking a lot of water and one may not. It does happen, right? Because sometimes we come with multi-layers, don't we? And
Right.
different personalities. And it's so important. But what's more wonderful is the fact that nutrition is it's so out there, right? But people are not aware themselves, Having said that, I tell you what, I spoke to a couple of patients about a month ago, right? And they had various health conditions. And I said to them, they were very elderly, and it just blew me away. It was like a moment of I was speechless. And as a talk show host, I'm usually talking a lot, I didn't know what to say. And I said, listen, what would be good for you is a smoothie, right? Some spinach, cucumber, broccoli, whatever it is, right? I said, yeah, we have one of those every morning. I said, pardon? I said, yeah, we love smoothies. I was absolutely stunned because I actually didn't expect that, Majority of people I speak to is like, smoothie? Well, how do you make that? Yeah. And
I love that.
What goes in it? And I'm thinking, and she's the one telling me, she says, you put half a banana in there as well and a bit of milk. And I'm thinking, this is great. This is a great conversation,
So they already knew what was good for them. I just want to mention one thing about the book. It's not just about diet and exercise and sleep and time of day, take your remedy, all the rest. But I also, because the mental and emotional is so important for me, I also put in there parenting advice for children of certain types and relationship advice, just understanding like why you are the way you are in a relationship. And I often have my patients tell their partners to read that section on them. So they have a better understanding of what makes them tick, why they do the things that they do, what they kind of working on towards, and how homeopathy can ultimately help them. And I feel like it's saved a lot of marriages and relationships.
I'm just looking through the book. It's absolutely needed. I think it should be in every household. It's over 400 pages of really important and key information. And actually, truly, it's the homeopathic lifestyle guide. So, Gabrielle, where do people get hold of the book? Most important.
Yeah, so my website is homeopathicbook.com, and that will give you, I know it's also on Amazon in most countries. Minerva Books in the UK sells it. So if you the kind of person that doesn't like using Amazon, there are other ways to obtain it. We have booksellers. Dana Ullman in the US is selling it on his website as well. So there are different resources to be able to get it.
And if anyone wants to contact yourself, please do share your contact details.
Yeah, so my website is sandiegohomeopathy.com, and all my information's on there.
Fantastic. Gabrielle, it's been an absolute pleasure and joy to have you on the Homeopathy Health Show. There's still so much to talk about, and I do hope that we can carry this conversation on in the future. But in the meantime, honestly, really chuffed that you came on, and thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my passion and my work. And oh my goodness, you are incredible. I don't know how you have the energy to do everything you do. And I just want you to know you're making such a big difference in the world. And I'm so honored to have a small part in this. So thank you.
It's very kind of you. Thank you so very much.
Take care.
I do hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the Homeopathy Health Show. Please do support the show by clicking follow on my socials. Remember, the more exposure the podcast receives, the better for homeopathy around the world. You can find me on Instagram by searching for @like_treatslike, and on both Facebook and TikTok by searching for @like_treatslike. So let's promote the voice of homeopathy on radio and podcast around the world together. Don't forget to visit me online at www.liketreatslike.co.uk and click on the radio and podcast tab. Here you'll be able to see all the guests that have joined me on the show so far. And of course, you can stream on demand the latest episode to your mobile, tablet or PC. Until next time, stay safe and take care.